If you wanted a title for this message, it would be How Can I Live My Whole Life Well? How can I live my whole life well? And now I'm sure you will agree that as you get older, it seems like your perception of time is that it goes quicker. Time seems to go faster and faster the older you get. And when you're young, of course, you can't wait to be older. That's why I grew a beard when I was 17. But then when you get older, you wish you were younger again. And so it goes on. Now, Ecclesiastes is here to help us understand every stage of our lives with an eternal perspective. From God's point of view. And it teaches us really how to live our whole lives well, regardless of what's going on in our life, regardless what situation we're in, whether we find ourselves enjoying it or not. It says this is how you are to live your life and live it for God's glory. So that's really the thrust of the message. It's how to live our whole life well. Now, before we get into the text, I just want to mention a conversation that I had with someone not so long ago. He was a young man, probably maybe early 20s perhaps, and I asked him, what are you looking forward to most in life? Anyone want to hazard a guess what he said? Retirement. Well, if you want to wish 50 years of your life away, that's the way to do it, isn't it? But it's quite sad, isn't it, that someone of that age would say, what are you looking forward to? Well, I'm looking forward to retirement, out of all the things he could have said. But I can almost guarantee that there will come a point in his life when he thinks to himself, if I had known at 18 years old what I know now, I would have done things differently in my life, and I wouldn't have wasted my life the way I have. And of course, he's never going to get those years back. If he's wishing them away, that once they're gone, aren't they? And our problem is, as sinful people, we do have a tendency to waste our lives in one way or another. Now, repeatedly, throughout the whole book of Ecclesiastes, it hammers home this message that life is short, that life is just a vapor, it's just transient. I know our translation says meaningless, but transient, temporary, doesn't last, a vapor, that's more getting at really what it's saying. It doesn't mean there's no point to any of it. It's saying it's temporary, it's short, it's transient, it's passing away. That's the idea in the book. And the message, particularly of the last chapter and a bit, before we get to where we are, has been that we should live wisely by enjoying the gifts that God has given us. It's big on enjoying life for God's glory. And so that's the message that we've had so far up to chapter 11. And then you've got this instruction really, which is the bulk of where we're looking at tonight. It's an instruction not to waste your life, whether you're young or old. Don't waste what you've got. Regardless of your age, the greatest joy that people can have is found in serving God, but living with the hope of eternity as the goal. That's the way we're designed to be as people, isn't it? We're designed to enjoy what we have while we've got it, but actually the final hope is eternal. It's not this life. And so what I want to look at this evening is how can I enjoy my life well, and how can I live my whole life to the fullest, or live it well for God's glory? It's all very well saying it, but how do you do it? That's the question, isn't it? So the first point I want to make is that we need to make the most of life while keeping an eternal perspective. That's the first thing. We need to make the most of what we have, make the most of life while keeping an eternal perspective. Now, when it comes to the idea of making the most of life, I think we broadly separate age groups into three categories. You have the pre-30s category, which tends to be the category where we think of everyone having a great life because they've got no responsibilities and they've got no ties, and so just carefree living up to that point. And that's often the time period where people look back on most with the most regrets. They often look back at that early period of life and think, why did I do this or that, or why didn't I do X, Y, Z? You've then got the next bracket, which is the 30s to 60s bracket. I'm generalizing, but it's more or less that kind of age group. And that's thought of as the serious adult phase of life, where we have to knuckle down and get on with it and perhaps raise a family and make sure we've got all our goals secured. And then the final bracket is the post-retirement bracket, which is when we spend more time at the golf club, allegedly. It's your so-called reward for all your hard work over the years. It's your reward of relaxation. The question is that the biblical view? It's not, is it? It's really not the biblical view. And that's not the view that this passage takes either. Have a look at verses 7 through 9. Because it speaks to this idea. It says, light is sweet and it pleases the eyes to see the sun. However many years anyone may live, let them enjoy them all, but let them remember the days of darkness, for there will be many. It says everything to come is meaningless. Well, the ability to enjoy your life is like the sweetness of the sun. It's like the sun's rays on you, but they don't last forever. We were just talking in the lobby out there about how the weather changes like this, 1 minute it's cold, the next minute it's rain, the next minute it's sunny. The sun doesn't last forever, and so the ability to enjoy the life is like the sweetness of the sun shining on you. It's there for a time, but it's not there permanently. And so the message here, it almost sounds a bit too much like common sense, but the message here is enjoy what you have while you've got it. It's very practical. Enjoy what you have while you've got it. Enjoy the benefits of youth while you have them. Enjoy whatever abilities God gives you while you have them with you, because you won't have them forever. And especially if God grants you long life, make the most of it. If God grants you long life and you still have abilities and you've still got the ability to serve him, then do it. Make sure you make the most of it. To use a common phrase, make hay while the sun shines. That's really what it's saying. We're told here, remember, the days of darkness will be many. Now, that's not talking about what happens after death. It's talking about the process before death. It's talking about how things can get difficult as you get older. That's the gist of what it's getting at here. And so it's saying, if you're young, don't wish your life away. Don't be longing for retirement as the thing you're looking forward to. Don't wish your life away, because there's going to come a time when there will be difficulties with old age. And you've got to bear that in mind at the start of your life. Try and begin life with that in mind, knowing that that's coming. And that's why it's important to enjoy God's gifts while we have them, and to live wisely while we have the ability to use the abilities we've got. It's saying make the most of what you've got. When you're young, don't do things that the later you will regret. Don't go and do things in early life that you're going to regret in later life. That's the impression you're getting here. And in fact, I can think of an example of this. There was a gentleman I spoke to not all that long ago, and when he was younger, he was a bit of a ladies' man. I'll put it that way. He was a bit of a ladies' man, and he didn't settle down until his 40s. And of course, so he settled down, but his work would take him to trips to Amsterdam every so often. And while he was in Amsterdam, I think he took a little holiday from his wife and child, if I can put it that way. And I spoke to him years later, and he looked back on his life and he regretted the way he had treated his wife. And he said, I wish I could have done something better. I should have treated her differently. I should have been better than that. But of course, once it's done, it's done. He couldn't go back and undo it. Couldn't change it. He couldn't make up for the sins of his past by being sorry about it in the present. He couldn't change anything. And that's a practical lesson, really, that's being given here. It's saying, while you are young, enjoy what you've got while you're young, but do it wisely. Don't do it in such a way that you're going to regret what you do later on. So it says, verse 9, you who are young, be happy while you're young, and let your young heart give you joy in all the days of your youth. Follow the ways of your heart and whatever your eyes see. But know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. See, it's funny, isn't it? Because we often hear advice like that, oh, just follow your heart. Isn't that what the world always says to you? Just follow your heart. That's all you want to do. And we think, no, I don't want to do that because the heart's desperately wicked above all things. Who can know it? I don't want to follow my heart. But this is not saying it in the way the world says it. It's saying there are legitimate things that when you are young, you enjoy, which you don't enjoy when you're older. So enjoy them, make the most of them. God has gifted you with what you have when you're young. Make the most of that, but don't do it stupidly. Don't enjoy things that you ought not to be enjoying. Don't do things in such a way that you're going to regret them later on. Don't do anything physically, morally, or spiritually which will hinder your life when you're older. It's a balance, isn't it? You know, this idea that people have, I think, that in order to be spiritual, well, God doesn't want you to ever enjoy anything. You have to be miserable in order to be spiritual. That's not the God of the Bible, is it? However, he's saying enjoy what you can enjoy legitimately, but bear in mind that all of these things you're accountable to God in. You're accountable to God for the way you use your life. So don't waste your life on things that you'll regret later. And so enjoyment of life is a commandment of God, according to Ecclesiastes. I bet you've never thought of it like that before. Enjoying life is a command. You will enjoy your life. But it is. It's an instruction, isn't it, to enjoy what God's given us. And that glorifies God. There's nothing glorifying to God about not accepting the things he gives us and saying, oh, I don't want that. I'm not going to entertain any of that. I don't want these things that you've given me. No, we should accept them and enjoy them for what they are. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a good thing. But do it wisely and do it well for God's glory. That's the message here. Enjoy life within the bounds of godliness. It's a bit like if you go bowling. It's one of those things that perhaps you do less of as you get older, I don't know. But when you go bowling, you have to bowl within the lane in order for it to work properly, don't you? I've seen many people who throw the ball up in the air and it kind of lands on the other lane next to it and rolls off at a tangent. It might be fun at the time, but it doesn't get you anywhere. Your score's 0 for doing that. But if you bowl within the parameters, if you had the guide rails up, it's even easier. It's cheating, isn't it? If you had the guide rails up and you bowl within the guide rails, you at least will score something. And this is the point here. It's saying, enjoy what you're doing, but do it within the correct parameters. Do it within the guide rails that God set up. And you're accountable to God for what you do with your body, what you fill your mind with, what you set your eyes upon, how you spend your time. You could go on, couldn't you? There's all sorts of things you could say. But do things that are worthwhile and invest your energy while you've got it into those things. And it pays off later. There could be nothing better if you're a believer than investing yourself in the kingdom of God. That's the best thing you can do, is to live for God's glory. So the first answer then to that question, how can I live the whole of my life well, is firstly to make the most of your life, but keep an eternal perspective. So remember to keep God in mind as you live. Now, the second thing is in verse 10, which I want to draw your attention to. We're coming up to the tricky bit in a minute. Verse 10, I would summarize it this way. Don't let the troubles of life crush your joy. Don't let the troubles of life crush your joy. Because let's face it, life is full of trials. Some of them are self-inflicted, as per what we were talking about just now. There are some things that come upon us as a result of stupid decisions we've made or sinful things we've done, which have consequences. Yes, you can be forgiven for those things. But we mustn't confuse forgiveness with consequences, because they're not the same thing. You can be forgiven for something, and yet there will still be consequences for it in your life. And so some of those things are self-inflicted that we undergo. Some of them may be due to the sins of other people. And some of the unpleasant stuff is just the things you can't control in life, isn't it? It's just things that happen. But all of these things can be a real setback to you in life if you don't guard your heart. Verse 10, have a look at verse 10. It says, "So then, banish anxiety from your heart and cast off the troubles of your body, for youth and vigour are meaningless." It's a warning not to allow sorrow, anxiety, cynicism, and bitterness to take root in your heart. It can often be the case that when we experience difficult things, often things that start off in younger life, if you don't deal with them, they carry on through until older life, and they become worse and worse. And these things can develop, can't they? You can start off with something that's a problem in your younger life, but if you don't deal with it, if you're not willing to give it to the Lord, if you're not willing to do that, and you cling on to it, it festers. It gets worse and worse and worse. And I don't know about you, but I can certainly think of several people in my life who have got terrible grudges that they hold. They're in their 70s, and yet they've got grudges that they hold from when they were 20-something. That's a long time to be carrying that around. And it doesn't do you any good. It doesn't do you any good. Getting angry about stuff does not do you any good, because it just makes it worse. The other person doesn't know you're angry, only you know you're angry, and you're the one that gets all worked up and frustrated by it, and it just makes it worse and worse and worse. There's a reason we have the expression grumpy old men, not grumpy young men. I mean, admittedly, some of them do fall into that category, but grumpy old men is a saying, and it's this kind of, it's a cliche, but it's that saying exists because what happens generally is that you become more cynical as you get older, and as you allow things to make you like that. And the passage we're looking at here mentions the young and the old. You notice it's got all the spectrum covered. So what about the people in the middle? What about that 30 to 60s group? You off the hook then, I suppose, because only mentions the young and the old. Well, no, because you don't suddenly go from 30 to 60 overnight, do you? You don't wake up the next morning and you're 30 years older. Aging is a process, isn't it? And so at every stage of life, you've got these issues that come up. They're different for different ages. When you're young, the kind of things that you deal with are different to the things you deal with when you're 40, are different to the kind of things you deal with when you're 70, 80, 90. But at every age group, you have these difficulties that come up. And because we live in a fallen world, you will always experience things that can get you down if you're not careful. And they can make you feel like giving up. And the advice to young people is don't waste your life being angry at the world. How many young people are part of, clubs is the wrong word for this, part of movements where the sole goal is to be angry at everything out there? I'm thinking about things like the goth movement. Anyone encountered goths? Yeah, the pale faces and the drab makeup and costumes and whatever have you. There are whole groups of society, punk I suppose was similar, wasn't it, where the whole point of it is to be angry at the world. Now, that is a waste of your life. Wasting your life as a young person being angry at everybody else is useless. It's a waste of your life. But the same goes for as you get older. Wasting your life being angry at young people because of their ignorance is a waste of your life as well. And wasting your life being angry at other people who are old is also a waste of your life. Because people will do dumb things regardless of whether you're angry at them or not. It's a waste of life. And it's just very practical, this. It's saying, look, you are wasting your life if you allow all these things to get you down. Don't let these things crush your joy. Because they can, can't they? They can. And it transitions into this part in chapter 12 where it says, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come and the years approach when you'll say, I find no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark and the clouds return after the rain. Well, the good news is that, of course, if you think that you can see yourself in this, if you think, well, actually, I have become bitter or I have become resentful, I have become grumpy, well, you can be forgiven for that because of Christ, can't you? No matter how unrighteous you are, we know that Christ has a perfect record of righteousness, and we are able to bring all of these things to him, regardless of what stage of life we're at. We can bring all of these things to him, and we can know that we will receive forgiveness for every sin that brought them about. So if it's down to things that you've done in your own life that you have regrets about, this is the time to deal with that, not 10 years' time. Might not be here in 10 years' time. The time to deal with it is now, isn't it? Don't go on allowing these things to mess your life up and hinder you. Deal with it now, and you can be assured that if you're trusting in Christ, that he will deal with it. Your sin will be done away with. It has been if you're a believer. But also, he can help you to work these things through. He can help you to work out these problems. So we come to this final section that we're going to look at in chapter 12. And if I had to put a subheading on this, it would be this. Let the aging process motivate you to live for God now while you can. Let the aging process motivate you to live for God now while you can. And the reason I say that is when you're younger, you don't realise how much easier it is to do things than when you're older. And this is why chapter 12 says what it says. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come and the years approach when you'll say, I find no pleasure in them. See, the reality is it can seem like everything's a sunny day when you're young. Every day's a sunny day and you can go skipping down the road and everything's fine. But there comes a point where days are more like a cloudy day as you get older, you know, and it feels like more like it's a rainy day and it's the clouds come back again, you know. Things can feel different as you get older. And there's a reason why it says this. It's saying this because serving God doesn't get easier just because you're older. If you're like the chap that I chatted to a few weeks ago, who said, I'm waiting for retirement, that's what I'm looking forward to. I think his idea, it was a semi-spiritual conversation. You know, we mentioned the gospel in that conversation, but I think his idea was, well, I'll deal with all that spiritual stuff later when I'm older. I've got time to serve God when I've retired and I've done everything else I want to do. You see, the problem with that is it doesn't get any easier, does it? And you don't need me to tell you that. If you're a bit older than I am, then you know the difficulties that you experience. It doesn't become easier to serve the Lord when you're older. In fact, there are challenges that you don't have when you're younger that you do have when you're older. Granted, you have wisdom on your side when you're older, but you don't always have energy on your side and physical ability on your side, do you? And so it's saying, let the aging process motivate you to serve God while you can. Do what you can do while you can do it and make the most of it. It's very practical. So the first 8 verses here of chapter 12, really they're an extended metaphor. They're a big illustration, if you like. It's comparing the aging process of a person to the degradation of a manor house and an estate. So if you imagine a big estate with a house and there's workers on the estate who go out to the fields and they do all kinds of jobs, and there's people, servants running around inside the house to do all their things, and it's describing this kind of gradual degradation of this manor and this estate, and it's saying this is a picture of what it's like for us to degrade as people. And you've got these, so you can't take it in a too much of a word for word kind of way. It's a broad, poetic way of describing things. But we no longer experience the sweetness of the sun previously mentioned. Doesn't mean we don't enjoy a sunny day, but it often feels like not every day is a sunny day because there's things that cloud that make it more difficult. Life becomes more like a cloudy day than a sunny day. And the picture moves on to this house and it's gradually degrading. Don't press the individual elements too far. There's some of them that I find quite comical if you read them a certain way. But the idea is that this estate gradually degrades, and so do we. We become weaker, we become more frail, and the strength of the arms of the keeper of the house become weakened. The sight of the eyes, the windows of the soul grow dim. Like teeth falling out, the grinders are few. There's a loss of hearing, as the sounds of those working outside become duller. They're there, but they're not as easy to perceive as they were before. There's a fearfulness of heights and obstacles. Getting upstairs can become a major task, can't it? It's very practical, isn't it? This, like the white blossom of an almond tree, so the hair becomes white. And as the grasshopper drags itself along, so in later years we struggle to get along, we hobble along. Desire fails, it says, and we lose our natural appetites as eternity gets nearer. It's the unfortunate result of sin in the world, isn't it? The degradation that we all experience in a fallen world. But of course, the point of this book is not just simply to say, live it up because tomorrow we die. The point of the book is to say, live your life for God's glory. Do everything you can to make the most of what he's given you, because you only get one life here. It's transient, it's passing away, and after that is eternity. Now, if you're a believer, you're looking forward to that, the time when you'll be with the Lord in glory. That's what you're looking forward to. We can't wait for that. And yet, you still experience life in a fallen world at the moment. And so it's saying, rather than letting that make you bitter and cynical, enjoy what God has given you and make the most of it, and use what he's given you for his glory. Use it wisely, live wisely. I want to just read a verse from Isaiah 46. You don't need to turn there, I'll just read it for you. Isaiah 46:4. It says, even to your old age I am he, and to grey hairs I will carry you. I have made and I will bear. I will carry and I will save. You see, we might change, but God doesn't, does he? We change all the time. From day to day we're changing. We're always in flux. We're always experiencing some new difficulty. We're always feeling different from one day to the next. I mean, I don't know about you, but I certainly can wake up feeling very different the next day to how I felt the previous day. One day you're on top of the world and everything feels great. The next day you wake up with a backache and trip over the dog, and everything goes to pot that day. That doesn't happen for God. God never has a bad day. It's a comfort, isn't it? God never has a bad day. God is always the same, always. He's always consistent. So all the struggles we go through, all our ups and downs, all of our likes and dislikes, all these things that we find a real burden in life, none of that is for God. None of that applies to God, because he's the same always, which means that we can rely on him. That's the good news, isn't it? Because we can rely on him. And when he promises that in Christ all your sins are dealt with, he means it. He's not going to go back on it. He's not going to wake up and with a sore head the next day and think, do you know what, I've changed my mind. He's going to say, no, all your sins are dealt with. You're forgiven. I'm going to keep working on you, transforming you, making you more and more like Christ until you get to the end of your life. And even when you're struggling to take your last breath, I will still be there with you. And I will carry you through that and into glory. That's the God we serve, and that God deserves our best, doesn't he? He deserves us to serve him well, to make the most of the whole of our lives, whether we're 15 or 95 or 96. We should serve him well, shouldn't we? And that's not because we're anything special in ourselves. We know we're not. Quite the opposite. But it's because he is something special. It's because he is worthy, and he has promised that he is going to take us through to the end, and he's given us everything we need to live a life that glorifies him. And so it should be our prayer that we would do that we would continually focus our eyes upon Christ, everything that he's accomplished, and make the most of what we've got while we've got it. Let's do it.